right, let's get started. So good evening, everyone. It is great to see you all again. And many of you know me. I am Ebony Tyler, and I, along with my colleagues from the Our Future of Science team, we are delighted to welcome you to our Community Talk series. And this series is a part of the Mentorship and Scholars Program of Our Future Science. And Our Future Science is a joint initiative between the Aspen Institute Science and Society Program and CODA Societies. And we are committed to sparking youth curiosity about, passion for, and confidence in STEM to not only advance science and ensure that diverse voices are heard and valued, but to solve society's most pressing issues. And we are generously supported by Genentech, the Manitou Fund, the Rita Allen Foundation, 3M, and Lydia Hills Philanthropies. So in addition to the headlines about more extreme weather, rising waters, high temperatures, we also need to focus on the communities that climate change is impacting the most. And the connection between environment and social justice is a key component of the Our Future Science program. And we are happy to kick off the learning in this area with tonight's talk. But before we start tonight's talk, we want to mention that the United Nations released a new report 2 days ago that was written by 270 researchers from 67 countries. And the two main takeaways from the report are that 1, climate change is impacting the Earth faster than previously predicted, and 2, countries are not doing enough to stop this. So for those of you who are in the mentorship program, we are including articles about this report on Canvas. And we are also including articles and resources that can help you understand this information and learn about the steps some are taking to combat the impact, especially on BIPOC communities. So tonight we have joining us our Dr. Danielle Ignance, an assistant professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at the University of British Columbia, and Kramer Wimberly, a maritime archaeology program lead and board member with Diving with a Purpose. So after their talks, we'll also have a few of our mentors in the program who focus on the environment. We'll say a few words about their work, and then we will follow with our questions and answer period. So now I will turn over the mic to our co-founder of Our Future Science, Garance Choco, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Ebony. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you again. And I am thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Danielle Ignance. Dr. Ignace is an ecophysiologist and science communication enthusiast. She recently joined the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at the University of British Columbia and is also a research associate at Harvard Forest. She's also an associate editor for the journal Elementa, Science of the Anthropocene. Dr. Ignace studies how climate change, landscape disturbance, and invasions impact ecosystem function and communities of color. Fostering distinctive collaborations with faculty and students to understand and communicate pressing global change problems is a hallmark of her work. As an enrolled member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, Dr. Ignace is deeply committed to developing Indigenous curriculum, and our unique perspective bridges Indigenous communities, people of color, and scientists. So welcome, Dr. Ignace. We're thrilled to have you, and I'll let you tell us more.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you all. I really think this program and what you're all doing is just so important and impressive. And so I can't wait to hear more from everyone's work. And thank you for the nice introduction. And I'd like to say that I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people here at UBC in Vancouver, British Columbia. I am a guest. I'm a new guest. I've been here since July. And I'm really grateful to be here and build respectful and collaborative relationships here. And I invite you all to consider whose land you're on and how you can interact with those communities. So as I've already had a great introduction to a little bit about my research program. If you'd like to get in touch with me, there's a nice QR code at the corner of the screen. It takes you to my website. You can catch me on Twitter, as well as some of my science communication videos seen on my YouTube channel. And I am an ecophysiologist by training. Really, that means I am looking at how global change, which includes climate change and invasions from pests, pathogens, and plants, and how that impacts our world ecosystems, our ecosystems' health. So I think about this from the perspective of how much carbon goes in and out of a system, as well as what that means for climate change. So that's me as a scientist. And I also have this other side of me, as was mentioned. I am an enrolled member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe. That's in northern Idaho, if you're not familiar. That's through my father's side. And on my mother's side, I am also Menominee, which is in northern Wisconsin. So my siblings and I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As a group, we identify as members of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and also as a community member of the Menominee tribe. And we, having grown up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my parents were very active in enhancing healthcare for Native Americans in urban settings, as well as supporting the Native American arts. So I really grew up with these two different perspectives, and almost went. I almost had a career that went either way on both of those sides of what the different fields that we can learn from. So that's really me more culturally and personally. We did grow up with this idea that not only do we have to choose a career, be great at it, but also be a leader and an advocate. And because it was so important that so few of us Indigenous people are in some of these fields, it becomes a career on a lifelong journey. And it's important to think about the legacy that we leave. So my father grew up in Idaho, and there's a fun story here of a full circle moment. He is still a physician, but he actually wanted to study and protect our world's forests. And in particular in Idaho, he became a smoke jumper, and which basically means jumping out of an airplane and fighting wildfires on the ground. But this did not last long, as you can imagine the grueling task of this, and ended up becoming a physician, and therefore he wanted to be a leader in that way. However, I grew up feeling that I would be a physician, and all it took was having a research experience in the Rocky Mountains, joining programs such as the one that you're all a part of. These experiences are so important for broadening perspectives, as well as the mentorship. I cannot tell you how important mentorship has been in my career. And this is where I decided I wanted to work on forests and study the impacts of climate change. And I'll go through a couple of examples here. We don't have too much time, but I'm happy to answer so many questions that you might have about this. I'll go through two examples. One is through my work at Harvard Forest. Harvard Forest is in Peterson, Massachusetts. So it's not in Cambridge or Boston, but it's about 45 minutes to an hour away from Boston. This is a really well-known and well-established field research station. Scientists from all over the world can come to the field station and study everything relating to forest ecology and climate change. And there's also a summer research program called the REU program. It's a research experience for undergraduates. That's the same program that I decided that I wanted to work on forests. And now I'm able to pay it forward and do the same thing here and be a mentor for undergraduates seeking to find their way in academia or perhaps not in academia. And what's unique about this field station is we are one of the first to implement an internship project for this summer program. This is upcoming on the second year. This year will be in person. Last year was virtual. That is focused on centering the local Indigenous community. In this case, the Harvard Forest site is located on Nipmuc land. So it becomes really important to think about the history, how we can build relationships with the Nipmuc Nation. This has been going on for 2 years. We've come a long way. It takes a lot of building of trust and commitment asking questions, asking the hard questions, as well as listening. So we are able to have this growing family. It really has been a wonderful experience. I'm happy to answer a lot of questions relating to how we get to that kind of experience. It takes a lot. It also takes a lot of patience, but really we are a family, and I view this as the beginning stages of a relationship building and how we can help, think about land stewardship and sustainability moving forward, not only as how they relate to the land, but think about economically, how can they be sustainable moving forward. Another project I'm working on is funded by Fair Count. I became a fellow in the Science for Social Equity program. What this does is it pairs a scientist, such as myself, with a community engager, and we essentially picked a city anywhere in the United States to focus on an environmental problem. And because my community engager partner lives in Houston, we went with Houston. We almost chose Atlanta and Vancouver. But because of this, it's as you may have already been thinking about or have worked on, to be engaged with the community takes being a member, or at least being there a good portion of the time. And so one of the biggest problems we have here in this area is that we essentially have an environmental injustice problem. These different neighborhoods are set up in a way that in which pollution it dramatically impacts, it has devastating impacts for communities of color, essentially the communities that have not done the polluting. And so on top of this, having these different environmental hazards and pollution hazards, on top of that, we have climate change. So that it really exacerbates the problem, and it exacerbates the burden that these communities are going through. So Houston is an interesting case where there is the administration, the local administration has set up a Resilient Houston plan. It's very forward thinking, decades into the future. How can Houston be more resilient in the face of climate change? The problem is two problems, really. It's very much in the future. What does the infrastructure look like to help Houston deal with and be resilient in the face of climate change? That is one problem. So it doesn't solve any immediate issues. The other problem is it has not really engaged the community. And so for this aspect of the project, we are engaging the community. We will have a series of events and panels and speakers, a lot like the one that you see today, as well as finding a way to have the community have their voices and needs heard in the face of these issues. So just to finish off here, like quickly going through some of these projects I worked on. So just 1 minute here, I think a lot about diversifying, and not only diversifying the people that are involved and the community members that are involved with any of these projects, but their perspectives, their experiences, knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer, as well as the relationships. And so this can be intergenerational, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, not just looking at peer-reviewed works. And the IPCC report was brought up earlier. That is a very dense and complex document. We need to find ways to make that more accessible and understandable to the community. And there's lots of different ways we can do that: video, audio, storytelling, and all these things need to be considered as we try to solve some of these problems. And so I often leave my talks with this big question when we think about climate change, equity, as well as action, in that scientists often don't involve the communities when trying to think about how we can adapt to or be resilient in the face of climate change and environmental hazards. So are we actually involving them in this process? I think that is one of the biggest ethics issues to be considered as we try to deal with climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ignace. I really like that you talked about being a leader and an advocate in your career, and what legacy you're going to be leaving. That's really important for our young people to be thinking about. So now we have our next speaker, and I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker. I had the pleasure of meeting Kramer Wimberly in Antigua this past winter. He was just coming back from a dive and we struck up a conversation. And the more I learned about Kramer, the more I knew that he'd be perfect fit for our community talk series to share his work. So Kramer is a maritime archaeology program lead and a board member for the organization Diving with a Purpose. He is a master scuba diver trainer. He has had a very diverse and inspiring career, and he continues to lead a full life of a huge range of activities. And his work is inspirational and it's fascinating. And I'm really happy to introduce you to him so he can tell you about his work. Kramer?
Thank you very much, Ebony. Right. Thank you for the invitation. Right. And I'm happy to be here with everyone to talk about Diving with a Purpose. I think it's a wonderful transition to have left off with Danielle, who's looking to find out how to engage with communities, because Diving with a Purpose is an organization of is an all volunteer organization. All right. Diving with a Purpose has really two branches. Our ethos is restoring our oceans and preserving our heritage. It was founded under the premise of searching for a slave ship that wrecked in the Florida Keys back in 1861. There was a documentary that was being done about in 2002, 2003, the search for the Guerrero, and the archaeologists in Biscayne National Park, where they believe the shipwreck lie, was being featured in this documentary. And the person running the documentary thought it would be a good idea to have some African-American divers be a part of the documentary, and they reached out to the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. So in an attempt to find the ship, the archaeologist was indicating, I'm the only person in this area searching, and there are hundreds of ships that lay in the national park area, and I can't dive alone. Divers have to dive with buddies. So the regional director for the National Association of Black Scuba Divers said, well, can anybody do it? She said, I'll teach anybody who wants to learn. And he said, hold on, let me make a phone call. He called a number of members of NABS, National Association of Black Scuba Divers, and said, instead of just diving for fun, why don't we dive for a purpose and go and find the slave ship that everyone's been looking for? And Diving with a Purpose was born. Right? That slave ship wrecked on a reef in the Florida Keys and did some horrible damage to the coral ecosystem, as well as killing 41 Africans in the wrecking event. Archaeologists taught us as volunteers, as citizen scientists, to engage in wreck site documentation. So we go down and document whatever wreck exists for the purposes of identifying it. And more specifically, we were looking for this particular slave ship to be able not only to say that we found the slave ship, but to be able to tell the stories of the Africans who were on those ships, because oftentimes all you hear about is the numbers. 10, 12 million Africans were transported. 2 million Africans died during the course of the passage, but no one can really tell you the names of the Africans who were on those ships, because the humanity was robbed from them. So a large part of the work of Diving with a Purpose, the volunteers, who are all professionals in their own fields of endeavor, right, come together with the purpose of documenting shipwrecks that have historical significance. So we have doctors in Diving with a Purpose. We have attorneys in Diving with a Purpose. We have artists and students and architects, and now some archaeologists, police officers, whoever it is. The driving force that brings us all together is, one, that we're divers, and two, that we have a desire to bring history back to life. Right. For myself, I am a former fire officer, 25 years. I'm a former EMT. I'm a former crime scene investigator, former emergency manager, contractor, prosecutor. I've done the gambit of things, but the thing that that I use most in the work that we engage in wreck site documentation is that every wreck site for us is a crime scene, because Africans were transported and died in the process. So, and that crime scene investigation, arson, was my background, is picking through the debris of remnants that are left over, which is typically what you see at a wreck site, little bits of information that we're trying to put back together again in order to identify the wreck, to be able to tell the story of what happened to those Africans during the transatlantic slave trade. Another huge part of diving with the purpose is, again, restoring our oceans. We worked for a number of years with the Coral Restoration Foundation in the Florida Keys, and they did work, still do work, phenomenal work in growing coral in a coral nursery, right, to then outplant it back out onto the reef. In the Florida Keys lost almost 90% of the hard corals along the Florida Reef Tract due to a disease that killed off all of the long spiny urchins. The long spiny urchins were responsible for grazing the reef and eating algae and keeping algae at bay. So the loss of the urchins had algae proliferate, and then the algae ended up killing off the majority of the coral. The work that we engage in now is coral ecosystem documenting, right? We do coral ecosystem monitoring to look at what organisms still exist on the coral reef, identifying indicator fish species, invertebrate species, and coral species that are endemic of a healthy coral reef ecosystem. So we go about the process of documenting whatever it is that exists to determine what the health of the reef by the presence or absence of those organisms. I got into diving about 35, 36 years ago as a hobby. Right? And I would dive all around the world looking for wrecks. That was my passion, hunting for wrecks. And a little over 10 years ago, I got drawn into taking a class with the Coral Restoration Foundation. And they teach you about maybe a half day, 3 hours in a classroom about coral and coral biology and the coral ecosystem. And then they take you out to the coral nursery to clean the nursery, to make sure that you're removing the algae from the coral trees. They actually have PVC trees hanging in the water, so the coral are in the water column and they grow faster that way. So we work in the nursery cleaning algae off of trees, and then hopefully a subsequent dive will have us taking the algae that have grown to full branches of coral and then outplanting them back out on the reef. After having done that for one day, right, just 45 minutes in the coral nursery with a toothbrush and a chisel, just cleaning algae off of trees, having been a diver for some 25 years by then, I felt like I could just be in the nursery with a toothbrush, cleaning algae off trees for the rest of my life, and it wouldn't be a wasted life because it was so rewarding knowing or feeling like you're giving back to the ocean, that it provides you with so much joy. Like I indicated, prior to coming to this work, I've been diving for some 34 some odd years now, over 4,000 dives on 5 continents. I'm a scuba instructor. I'm a master instructor. I've been instructing for a very long time, right? And I do technical diving, trimix diving, rebreather diving, right? All kinds of stuff. But this diving work of monitoring our ecosystem in order to save the environment is where I spend the vast majority of my time for the last, I don't know, 8 years. So our mission is to save the coral ecosystem. Right? The coral ecosystem, and most people aren't aware of this, right, represents less than 1% of the entire ocean bottom. Right? So if you look all around the world and think in terms of less than 1% is made up of our coral ecosystem. Hard corals in that coral ecosystem are responsible for better than 70% of the oxygen production on the planet. We don't breathe without that 1%. Yet, we're dumping 7 million tons of plastics and garbage in the ocean annually, right? We're heating up our planet with global warming. The heating up of the planet is causing the ocean to warm because the ocean is responsible for cooling the planet. If the ocean weren't there, the average temperatures on the planet would be in excess of 130, 140 degrees. It absorbs heat, right? The carbon dioxide that we're pumping into the atmosphere is also being absorbed by the ocean, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because the ocean eats or consumes carbon dioxide. But we're pumping so much in that it's creating so much carbon gas that the ocean is becoming more acidic, right? Which is weakening the coral structures, weakening the structures of many of the organisms, and throwing everything out of balance. So documenting the organisms is our way of keeping check on how bad things are, right? And providing data to policymakers and scientists so that they can say, okay, this is how bad it is. Is it getting any better? Where is it better? Where is it worse? What do we need to do to correct for this? Diving with a Purpose works on those two branches, right? The focal point is one, that we're citizen scientists, right? We engage with scientists when they have information that they're looking for, or they need hands on the ground in order to get things done. Divers who love and spend the majority of their time in the ocean are the natural ambassadors for the ocean, to speak for it and to aid scientists in getting the work done. My intention was, and I hope I've been effective in doing that, is sharing my passion with attempting to save the ocean for every living thing that exists on this planet. And if that came across, then I think I will have effectively done my job. Thank you very much for giving me the platform and allowing me the time.
Thank you, Kramer. So there was such a sense of urgency in your talk. So I can't wait till we get to the Q&A, but just the urgency that the ocean is responsible for us breathing and life. Yes. So really excited to get to the Q&A. But before we get there, we have at least 5 of our Future of Science mentors. They conduct research about the environment, and we would love if they can share a little bit of their work with a brief statement. So Rachel, are you on?
I am. Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm from North Carolina, but I go to the University of Rhode Island, and I'm in the Marine Affairs Department. So I study how fish can contribute to food security and nutrition outcomes. Because yeah, the ocean isn't just good for us breathing, but it's also a great source of food.
Food source.
And we want to protect that for our future.
Thank you, Rachel. Juliana, she wasn't able to be here with us tonight, but Juliana is a graduate student at the Geological Sciences Department at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she studies the response of ancient lake basins to global warming in the past, millions of years ago, in order to better understand how we expect lake ecosystems to change in response to present day global warming and climate change. And Amy is joining us. Are you here?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Stewart. I'm a master's student at the University of Guam. I share Kramer's love and passion of the ocean. I, too, am studying coral restoration. and my project is working on sexually propagating coral. So Kramer mentioned these coral nurseries and coral trees. Well, the way we do that is we have a coral and we take a piece off of it, we fragment it, and that's what grows in the nursery. And we can keep fragmenting a single coral and letting it grow in the nursery and outplant it. I'm working to eliminate the effect on the coral from fragmenting it and propagating these corals, and working to restore larger areas of reef. So islands like Guam and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas Islands and all these small islands out here can be protected by the reefs that we rely so heavily on. So very excited, and thank you, Kramer, for sharing your passion. I echo everything you said and everything Rachel just said as well. So
thank you. And then we have Amani, and Amani is a PhD student from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, where she studies the body of sharks and their conservation. And in her field, one of the biggest environmental concerns that they deal with is the decline in shark populations and how that will get worse with the current climate issues like global warming. So mentees, if you have not done so already, we really want to encourage you to watch your mentors' videos of their labs. They are really, really good. And not just saying that, they are really, really good. And it's a great opportunity for you to see their work. Thank you, mentors, for putting those videos together. And scholars, we want to encourage you all to watch the mentor tours, which are available on our YouTube channel. And we're going to put that playlist in the chat. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erin, our co-founder of Our Future Science, to lead the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ebony, and to our two fantastic guest speakers today. I want to do less talking at this Q&A and hear more from our students. We had one question already come up. Destiny, do you want to unmute and ask the question that you already posed?
Sure. So first off, I want to say thank you for sharing your passion with us. I didn't know and about anything like this until today, and I can't wait to go and tell my teacher about this because he loves science. And I know this is something that we're going to bond over. But my question for Kramer today is, what can non-divers do to help preserve the coral ecosystem?
As an instructor, right, my first go-to is always going to be, let's turn you into a diver, right? Which is easy, right? But one of the easiest things that we can do is working on decreasing your carbon footprint, right? Like all of my non-divers, we can still go and help do coastal cleanups, removing plastics and debris. Everyone can stop using balloons that end up in the ocean, killing marine life. Those are three easy things, right off the bat, right? Because those are things that end up in the ocean and end up killing more of the marine life.
Great, thank you. Another question came in by direct message. Dr. Ignace, does your work hold big business accountable for the pollution that it's causing to communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what's interesting, I assume this is referring to the Houston project. And what's interesting about that project, Resilient Houston, I wonder if there's anyone here from Houston or Texas, in that I have colleagues there and ask them, and they are very environmentally aware and advocates as well, and had never heard of Resilient Houston. And there were press releases that were put out, and you could find those as well if you just did a Google search. Other than that, it really received little press or dialogue. And if you look at the document and who actually funded this group, so it's a very long, complicated document. It talks about the steps they've taken to help kind of create this, in a sense, a strategic plan of how Houston could be more resilient. But if you look at who funded it, it is the big companies that have probably done the most pollution. So I think there's an interesting, there's an interesting interaction happening there. So if we look at the actions taken, who is sitting at the table? I would say leaders from those organizations, leaders that have money, and the funding, but the community does not have a seat at the table, or the funding, or I would say funding to help with their needs immediately, as opposed to something that could reduce carbon release to the atmosphere or other pollutants 15 or 20 years time. So what we are doing in the stages of now, we have toolkits in development. A first one's been developed to help the community understand that this actually exists and that they can have a voice, and there's information that they're not getting, and that's what we are there to help with. More toolkits are in development to actually have have that conduit, have that ability for them to actually raise and amplify their voices of what they're going through and what changes and what they need immediately, as opposed to 15 years from now. And so this has different levels to it, both to hopefully the mayor's office, hopefully Houston, thinking about a county level, but also straight to the EPA. The EPA has said that they want to hear more from communities, especially a community like Houston. Well, that's what we're trying. We're trying to get a direct line to them. Yeah, good question.
Thank you. We have two hands up. Octavian, let's go to you first, please. Unmute and ask your question. And introduce yourself first as well.
Hi, my name is Octavian. I'm a mentor. I go to the Ohio State University, and I'm a graduate student in the analytical chemistry lab. My question was for Mr. Kramer. You worked in as a crime scene investigator, which is closely related to the field I want to go into, which is forensic science. How did you enter that field, and did you enjoy it while you were there?
I'll answer that question in a second. I did want to circle back to the young lady who asked what can be done, right? And I was on some level negligent in not communicating that there's loads of work that can be done in research labs, right? I believe it was the Amy, right? And the young lady who works at NJIT, one of my alma mater, right? There's research in studying coral and the coral ecosystem all over the place. All you have to do is engage. Crime scene. I started my career as a firefighter, right? And all arson investigators, crime scene investigators, have to come through crime scene through the fire department, at least in the state of New Jersey. They may have other requirements in other areas. And having fought fires and realized the devastating impact and attempting to figure out how those things happen brought me to arson, because oftentimes you're looking at a burnt out shell of a building and trying to figure out, well, how can you figure out what was the cause of the fire? And you're digging through rubble and debris, and there are ways of solving each one of those problems. Actually, my unit was the second largest on the Eastern Seaboard, and we had a 78% conviction rate because we could find out how those things happen. So crime scene investigation is an extremely interesting field if you want to engage in it.
Thank you. Sarah had a great question in a direct message to me, but would you unmute and ask it yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I was kind of just like circling back to like what you were talking about, like more of the climate before. What's one of the most frustrating things that you've encountered like while working in the field of climate change? Because I know that we should be doing a lot more than what we are doing now. And it is frustrating when there are people who have different opinions about what's going on in the climate and what's actually happening scientifically. And then I also wanted to know, just like as someone who is not in the research, but maybe would like to go into it or doesn't know as much, like what can I do on a daily basis that like would truly make a bigger impact?
I'd love to hear from both of you on those questions if you'd be willing.
Yeah, could you repeat the first question?
Yeah, just basically like what's the most frustrating thing you've encountered while working in the field or research of climate change?
Yeah, let's see, how much time do we have? Actually, we've come a long way. It's, let's see, 20 years ago, I used to, where I was flying to a conference and would meet someone, whoever was sitting next to me on the plane, and yeah, at some point the conversation is, oh, what do you do? And so that was in my grad school years, 20 years ago. And of course, often the answer or feedback I got was, you don't really believe in global warming, do you? It's not, the climate's not changing. And so at some point I kind of stopped saying what I did because I was having a hard time, or yes, I would say getting nowhere with these interesting dialogues that were so random on a flight. But I don't get to that dialogue anymore. So I think that's an interesting place to be. I guess 20 years ago, thinking that we wouldn't get to where we are now. And I think maybe some frustration, current day, that's such an old frustration that I think has changed for the good, that I think now we see, whatever news outlet you choose, now we see climate change in the heading, in the headline, in the title. That really was not a thing, not too long time ago. If you look at the titles and the headlines, finally, I think being recognized, because I think, unfortunately, it has hit us, most of us, if not all of us, in some really profound way, right? Whether it's wildfires, flooding, ever since I moved here, wildfires and devastating flooding that has literally cracked highways in half have impacted my life. And I have only been here for a few months. So I think what's frustrating, I think not the dialogue so much on, is it true? Although there are still deniers out there. I think in my area of research and thinking about carbon and carbon storage, which is such a huge and, I guess in a sense, literally a figuratively hot topic right now, is in my work with forests and plants. So my career is devoted to studying plants and their physiology and ecosystems and how they can take in CO2 from the atmosphere and then store it in the soil or in their biomass. And so what's, I think, frustrating for me currently is that, especially in an area where I live now, in that we have a logging industry, right? We have communities that may want to get into that, and economically, it's good business, and then we have others that don't. I think the new frustration for me is talking about old growth forests and whether they're worth saving or not. And, oh, can't we just plant more trees? And the answer is both, save them and plant more trees. But we see all these interesting activities across the country, in the US, plans to plant, 5 million trees in several years. And without the infrastructure to actually help keep those alive, right? It takes years. It can take decades for those planting tree initiatives to actually combat climate change and take up enough of that CO2. So very complicated. So I'm just seeing some interesting, for the new frustration, I think, is not appreciating the ways healthy ecosystems can take in and store carbon, and especially like old growth forests in my area, and also looking for quick fixes that these are not quick fixes. Yes, it's daily behavior, the actions we choose, but if we're trying to protect our ecosystems, not only protect them and save them and plant new trees and things like that, but also understand that there are sustainable ways of relating to the land. So in my of course, being Indigenous and working with Indigenous communities, not having their knowledge valued or supported. So there's still very extractive methods and things happening there. I'll stop with that. Those are some big ones though.
Great.
Okay.
And
Kramer,
there was a second question, but
frustrations?
I'll let Kramer go up first on
Yeah.
on the frustrations part.
Right. It was Einstein who said the problems we face will not be solved by the minds that created them. Right? And implying that those who are in charge right now aren't going to be solving the problem. It's you, the young people, who are going to come up with the solutions to the problems that we've created for you. So that's one. Right? I don't get into arguments or conversations or debates with climate deniers because it's just a waste of time. But I also recognize, as far as human beings are concerned, right, we're motivated. Human beings tend to be motivated by two things, death and money. Right? So the closer we come to the tipping point, right, you see people acknowledging that climate change is real. But we're still doing a lot of the negative things that we should not be doing. Right? Once you show big business that it is profitable to engage in work to save the ecosystem, right, then they'll jump on board because it's profitable to them. Right? It's been said that there 60% or more of the new cutting edge medicines are coming from the coral ecosystem, that we're destroying, right? So if you can show big business that there's money in it, $5 trillion worth of investment in preserving the coral ecosystem that you're going to be drawing more money out of in the long run, then they will get on board, and they're starting to get there. It's just it's slow to move a train or redirect it. That's the answer to the first part of the question for me.
And then just briefly, because we have some other ones that have come in briefly, that balance between daily activities that we as individuals could do, or perhaps broader organizations that young people could join. What are daily activities that actually might make a difference in some of the fields that you're working on?
Sure. I think daily activities, I think walking is great. If you're, I think if you're able to reduce, using the car so much, right? I get it. It just depends on where you are and whether, are you injured or not? Like I've been, was recently injured, so it's fine now. But yeah, so that depends on a lot, right? But riding, if you have a bike, riding a bike, walking, I think just little habits like that, whether you take the elevator or not. Of course, an old-fashioned one that I think never goes away really is the electricity, right? Trying to unplug the things you're not using, and trying to unplug the things you're not using, and as well as turning things off, right? You leave a room, turn the lights off. So that's kind of one of those older fashioned ideas. I do think a lot about food and food security as well. Some of my previous activities, and it's definitely a passion that I teach about in some of my courses, whether environmentally or plant-based, and thinking about agriculture as a field, just as this whole huge business. How do we feed the world? I've focused a lot more on, local, eating local, and not only is that good for, local farmers, but, having more sustainable methods that aren't so pollution driven in a sense. So those are just a few, I think, off the top of my head. Using less water, things like that.
Single-use plastics, right? We're now wrapping apples in a plastic container to protect it. We're wrapping individual pieces of fruit and then they're discarded, and that's laying in a landfill forever. So single-use plastics, straws, plastic garbage bags, using recycled bags to take to the store. These are small, easy things, right, that individuals can do, right, to remove plastics from the ecosystem.
Great. Labake, I saw you had your hand up earlier. Would you unmute and ask your question?
Hello, my name is Labaka. I'm from St. Louis. I'm a senior in high school. And like, this is more of like a general question. So like, from my understanding, like global warming is obviously like this global issue, but I feel like it disproportionately affects developing countries. So what can be done for these countries? And like, I understand that Miss Ignace, is that how you pronounce it? I understand that your work is like more domestic, but like, how would you expand that to like help people across the globe, especially in like developing countries?
Gosh, that's a that's a huge question. Yeah, because developing countries has not been part of my research program. But I will say this though, and this does tie in with what I was talking about with the agriculture and feeding the world, and but also ecosystem health. And how we, I think we're starting to see, or I shouldn't say even starting, we have seen that, history repeating itself in different parts of the world, especially, developing, those areas are developing more and more. And so I think, a few things, the redistribution of products, and if we just think about even agriculture and how we feed those different communities, it's really expensive. So different parts of the world experience, the expenses to feeding a lot of people differently. And so I think redistributing in those resources to feed a lot of people, and what's needed to make those, healthy crops, and actually a lot of it, I think that needs to be redistributed in a way. And also protection of ecosystems. Again, there are sustainable ways of maintaining healthy ecosystems. These need to be protected. The UN, as was mentioned earlier about the new climate report that just came out, it was just I think we're almost on 3 years, or two or 3 years ago, they also made a statement that one of the key roles to combating climate change was valuing and protecting Indigenous communities all over the world, and protecting their land as well as their knowledge, and how, because a lot of it can be really sustainable. So I think protecting those lands and that knowledge, and hopefully having something that's more sustainable, as well as redistributing of resources, I think will be incredibly important.
Thank you. Another question came in directly for Kramer. Paloma wanted to know, how do you become a diver in a land restricted area as a minor?
What area are we referring to?
Paloma, do you want to unmute and ask your question more clearly than I did?
Yeah, sure. So generally, like, how would you even like become a diver, or how could you put that skill to good use in like an area without oceans, or like in a big city, I guess?
If you have a pool, right, or a puddle of water, I can teach you how to dive, right? We have a program called Youth Diving with a Purpose, and we train youth. We get them certified, and we put them into our programs for maritime archaeology and coral ecosystem monitoring. If the passion is there, right, someone will provide you with my contact information, or you can go online to Diving with a Purpose, the youth program, and we'll figure it out.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more that I'll ask here to Dr. Ignace. What are some technological advances in the area of carbon sequestration, and what field of science should one go into if they're interested in that kind of work?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Yeah, so technology, since I've arrived here at UBC, there have been collaborations I never thought would happen in my lifetime for my own career. I'm very much, my work is very much, I can go to any forest or ecosystem, whether it's the desert or coastal areas or the forest here, and dig up soil. I can just collect samples, literally get dirty in the soil, dig them up, and process those for different measurements and analyses. So in a way, my work is really cheap. Sometimes I just need something to dig up soil, and sometimes I just need a brown paper bag to store something, and we put it in a drying oven, and then we can process that later. The flip side, and that's really important, the flip side is it's really important to combine that with, of course, incredibly expensive equipment. And so one that I have used measures gas exchange. It can measure gas exchange on leaves. So you can go out to your backyard, literally take this portable photosynthesis system and measure how much photosynthesis it's doing. I'm a huge photosynthesis nerd, so I can talk about that all day. It can also measure how much CO2 is coming from the ground, how much is coming from the soil and going back out to the atmosphere, and of course, contributing more to global warming. So that kind of piece of equipment has been around for a while. I think there are different versions of it, the cheaper to, kind of more like the Tesla version of it. And they're becoming more user friendly. And I think that's important to note. I'm really pleased to see that. It's still incredibly expensive. Those companies, they are in it to, yes, make a profit, but also, help measure the environment. And so there's that aspect, learning, just kind of being immersive in learning those kinds of tools, getting research experience in different labs. Also, I think a new thing would be how biomass gets, I guess there's some gasification processes, like whatever products is, forestry is such a big industry here. And so, now I'm, interacting with engineers, chemical engineers, all kinds of different engineers that are finding unique ways to process some of these byproducts, some of, wood products. How can we help to reduce the CO2 that goes back out to the atmosphere? That is, I think, one of the biggest, in a sense, hot tickets forward. Unique collaborations, I think, so important. Also, remote sensing, using drones, to be honest, and special imagery. You can put all kinds of sensors and cameras on drones to capture all kinds of information from the local plot level to the whole ecosystem and canopy level. And remote sensing, of course, is using satellites to look at the world. So all of that, to integrate across time and space, incredibly important. Those are, I guess, technology. I think it's important there. I do think this is for everyone, whether it's coding and some software to do analyses or make, predictions, future projections of what could happen in the face of climate change. That's all important, and it's an exciting time.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank both of you for your efforts to introduce our students tonight to diverse educational and career paths that have the goal of addressing and impacting environmental issues, and of course, highlighting the communities that are most affected by them. This was extremely informative, and we're so grateful to both of you. I'm going to hand it over to Ebony, who's going to close this out for the evening.
So this has been an incredibly important talk, especially in light of the new climate report. And we are just so thankful that we have a younger generation who is interested in combining science with activism to do many of the things that our presenters spoke about tonight. And we are grateful to Dr. Ignace and to Kramer Wimberly for spending this hour with us. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending this community talk, and we are excited about what's to come for the remainder of the program. So please visit our website, ourfuturescience.org, and follow us on social media to learn about our initiative and future events and campaigns. And we are happy to release a new module on the environment and social justice for the mentorship program. So make sure you check it out on Canvas. So I'd like to say good night, but mentees, please stay on for an extra 15 minutes, and you can ask us questions about the program. We'll troubleshoot some technical issues, and we will answer your questions about the capstone project that has been released. So good night, everyone.
Please join us in thanking our guests tonight.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ignace.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kramer. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.